Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. As you know, the US election has started, the US presidential election. It's a question of Trump versus Harris, who is going to win. But apart from that, US election, whoever wins, there's going to be a lot of impact on the way the world is, goes forward. One direction is definitely going to be what happens with China, which is such a big factor in so many things. How the US elections will impact China's relationship. Whoever becomes president will impact US relations with China. But before we go into that, let me introduce my guest. He's Dean Baxendale. He's publisher. He's CEO of China Democracy Fund. And he's the co-author of the book, Canada Under Siege. He's speaking from Canada. He's just traveled back from Washington. He said 2 weeks back. He's a regular in the Washington circuit. He knows everybody over there. He knows, I would say, how the election is going over there. So, Dean, first question, how is the election shaping up, do you think?
Well, Joyeeta, first of all, it's great to see you. Great to be on your podcast here today.
Yes, thank you.
This has been, as we all know, Indian television has been covering this, global media. This has been obviously one of the most divisive elections in American history. It is set to set at least two records. One, to elect potentially a female president of Indian and black descent to the White House. It also, if Donald Trump is to win, it would put in a past president. Not since Grover Cleveland, I believe, has this taken place. So these are historic on that level. We know what the Trump legacy was, in so much that we found that Donald Trump was transactional. This is confirmed by both people who work very closely with him, some of whom I have worked with over the past few years on human rights and issues around China. And that method will continue moving forward. The polls, as you know, are deadlocked. However, some of the in the last 48 hours, and again, polls are polls, so I wouldn't put any stock in them necessarily, are suggesting that there is some momentum for vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris.
But Dean, don't you think, given that Trump's controversial record, the very fact that the polls are in kind of a deadlock, that itself is quite incredible, isn't it?
It is indeed. And Joyeeta, this again, I think explains, where we're at geopolitically and globally in terms of our politics, whether it be in India, whether it be in Canada. We are in a different geopolitical environment where the nations, the CRINCS alliance, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and we couldn't throw in a couple of other nations in there from South America that are part of the BRICS alliance. And I exclude India in this conversation, very most importantly, because India is setting its own path. But these nations are supporting an authoritarian, government, and we're seeing this play out. And so people are afraid, I think, and I think Americans are afraid and perhaps looking to Donald Trump as being this tough president, the man who says that he did not allow, any wars to start, that he can get along with Putin, he can get along with Xi Jinping, and of course, our dear friend from North Korea to boot. So I think that this speaks to an electorate that's very divided, left and right, polar opposites, and it's an interesting time for geopolitics globally.
So what exactly, when you talk to people over there, you are in regular touch with them, you have been regularly going to Washington and other places also, I'm certain. What is the impression that you're gaining from people after talking to people and policymakers and all? What exactly are they looking at in terms of changes in policy if either Trump comes or Harris continues? Will it be Biden's policy that will be going on? What exactly are they saying?
I think as it relates to China specifically, that
Yes.
we are going to see much of the same under if it's a Harris victory, and in terms of continuing on with tariffs and a very tough stand, more specifically around the support of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to protect intellectual property and naturally our military and industrial secrets from China, which, as we know, has spied on all of us, including India, to steal important technology, to gain advantage for its military and its industrial base. Ultimately, they're trying to win out on their strategy, which is to become the predominant global hegemony at everybody's expense. And I think I see the Harris administration, if they're to win, continuing on. Under Donald Trump, he has obviously threatened more significant tariffs on everything from EVs to technology, industrial products coming into the United States. This, while it sounds tough, and it is tough, may lead to a renewed inflationary crisis in America, and ultimately consumers will end up paying for these tariffs. And I don't think that is a strategy that's a winning strategy in terms of combating China in the long run. I think targeted sanctions against China, certainly by the Biden administration, have set the tone moving forward. And I think Donald Trump has to be very careful not to antagonize China, to which they then start to take even more aggressive action against Taiwan and other nations.
So when you're looking at the 4 years of foreign policy, I mean, particularly Biden's policy, while there have been tariffs and sanctions and all, but it's a fact that there have been complaints in terms of Biden being too soft on China. That also has been there, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that one has to view the policy. When I speak to people in Washington and various commissions, there's two schools of thought. So my Republican friends, certainly applaud the administration for continuing on with the very tough stance that Secretary Pompeo left on, and that was, first of all, to declare a genocide against the Uyghurs, which ultimately set up the next couple of years for U.S. State Department policy on China, especially around forced labor products, and obviously pointing out this kind of egregious operations by the CCP that provide them with economic advantage. But so they were forced into the position. They adopted that position. But I think on certain aspects they have tried to play the Democratic card, which is around being conciliatory, and also to try to negotiate, believing that the only way to get there is through fair and open dialogue. Unfortunately, I think, as India knows, that China is very unlikely to actually take this very seriously. And I think we need to have even stronger policy towards China, show them that we are not afraid to combat them and to take them on both economically, diplomatically, as well as militarily as needed.
So when specifically, for example, the question of Taiwan, how do you think the two administrations, possible either way, would be handling the Taiwan question? Because when it came to Biden, there were some voices that were saying that maybe Biden was not interested in defending Taiwan. And there was also talk that, the kind of help and the involvement of the US in the Ukraine war, that shifted Biden's attention from the Taiwan issue. So in a way that really served China well, because you see, I mean, nobody was looking at Taiwan. So what exactly was the Biden approach, and what is likely to be the Biden, rather, I would say the Harris approach is likely to be on Taiwan, and the Trump approach? What is the difference?
Well, I think that, again, I think Donald Trump, if given the opportunity, he'll try to negotiate some deal on Taiwan that I don't think will be in the favor of the Taiwanese people. The Democrats will continue to, push and adhere to the one China policy. I also think that this is dangerous in the long run. I believe that nations, including Canada and India, should show their unanimous support for Taiwan as a democratic and free nation. And I think this kind of diplomatic support would demonstrate to China that the West and those in Asia and also Japan, South Korea, etc., are here to defend democratic freedoms and values, and we're not going to sacrifice the people of Taiwan through our international policy. So that's how I think it should be approached. I think a tougher stance by both governments getting into power would be in the best interest of all.
So when you're looking at, for example, the war situation, I mean, would you say that Biden had taken his eye off the ball in terms of with that Ukraine war that I was talking about? So would you say that, the Ukraine war and the Israeli, what is going on, is it possible for Trump when he says that, I'm going to solve it, the North Korean issue also that he talks about, is it going to be that easy for him?
Well, Joyeeta, I think both you and I know that that's folly in of itself. That the notion that we can simply perhaps negotiate through perhaps exchanging a few beads and a few trinkets and some trade things is going to solve the problem. It's not, and I think that this is where Donald Trump's transactional and his lack of awareness vis-a-vis geopolitical conflict and how diplomacy works in these various venues puts him at a disadvantage in terms of trying to negotiate. Anyone can do a deal in the end. It's at what cost does what happens in the end? Taiwan and Biden on the one hand is focused on Ukraine, put a lot of effort into defending Ukraine, and I think that's the right strategy because in actual fact that demonstrates to China what the West was willing to pay, what price we're willing to pay to defend democracy and freedom in Ukraine. If Ukraine is to fall, if Donald Trump does a transaction on Ukraine with Putin because he's a buddy or whatever the case might be, I think this is a bad omen for Taiwan and it's a bad omen for democracy globally.
So who do you think China would like as president of the US?
Well, one would look at it and suggest, well, Kamala Harris, because she, looks like she's most willing to, negotiate and look at diplomacy and keep trade, moving back and forth. And Donald Trump, on the other hand, looks like, oh, he's the tough guy, and he's going to actually make it more difficult on China to compete. Make America great industrially and commercially. Again, threatens potentially China's, slave labor, subsidized power, and environmental standards that have allowed them to compete against the West, over the past 25, 30 years, and to gain such economic providence globally. And so it appears that way, but I actually think they'd prefer to have Trump in as president, because if he goes the way that he goes on the Ukraine and he suggests that there's a deal to be done, we should give up territory, we should cede territory to Russia, we shouldn't allow the Ukraine to join NATO, I think that opens an opportunity for China to negotiate on, as they would say, the peaceful reunification of Taiwan, to which when I speak to my Taiwanese colleagues, and they don't want anything to do with that notion.
Yeah. So when we are looking at, say, for example, Biden's foreign policy, and you see how much, or other Biden's policies, I would say in general, how much of that is a burden or an advantage for someone like Kamala Harris?
Well, again, is Kamala Harris going to, be an absolute continuation of the Kamala Harris Biden administration? I think not. I think we're underestimating her resolve to set her own course on the international stage. She clearly wants a resolution on the Hamas Palestinian issue in Gaza, but that will come at a price. And I think that we have to recognize on China, I think she recognizes the vulnerability of the American state and the West to China from an economic perspective. And I think we might be surprised on the upside on her toughness on China moving forward.
And what about the Indo-Pacific policy of the Biden administration? Do you think Trump will continue with that? Do you think Harris will continue with that? Because after all, in terms of containing China, of course, one of the central pillars of that is containing China. And there is a lot of, fine, we will talk about it later, but it seems there's a lot of influence of China in Washington. Okay. So how is that going to influence and affect policy, particularly towards the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount, as you know, of China influence in Washington, various think tanks that have been funded through the CCP or proxies or directly. And that, I think the strategy for Indo-Pacific in the engagement with India as an emerging, again, this has been an emerging economy for some time. But I think India is at the precipice to really, flourish and grow significantly. And I think this can be an advantage to the United States and to the West in terms of investment, in terms of being a counter to China's industrial might and manufacturing might, which they have put all their eggs in one basket on, as far as we can see. But we must do it in a way that engages India, recognizing that India does have its right to build its own alliances. But of course, sitting here from Canada, I would say I would like India to commit more towards the Democratic Alliance than to work closely with China. But I recognize you're on the border. I'm not right now. However, according to China, Canada is a near Arctic nation. So when those Chinese icebreakers come in the Arctic to claim sovereignty over Canada's Arctic, and the Russians as well, that'll be an interesting time indeed. But no, I think there's a great opportunity for India at this juncture. I think that's why Canada has pivoted towards India, regardless of our current conflict created around the Niger assassination.
Yeah, okay. Now, since we are talking Indo-Pacific, I'm going to speak of a region which you are closely familiar with. Daniel Sridhani personally, and
yes.
So what about the that Pacific Island countries where China is trying to get a foothold and has got a foothold? What exactly, I would say, irrespective of the administration that is there or coming, how serious is America about that particular region?
Yeah, I think, as you know, through our mutual colleague, Cleo Pascal, who really did a great job in Washington of bringing this issue to the attention of the administration. But the South Pacific Islands, both from a regional perspective, are critical for China if it's able to gain control. Controlling the sea lanes directly north coming up from New Zealand, as well as through from Australia, puts the CCP and the PLA at tremendous advantage. I think America sending a diplomatic mission there was a great thing. But this operation, in terms of their BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, but Belt and Road Initiative with bribes. Let's be honest. They're buying the government, but they're buying the government they've encircled the United States, Barbados, Antigua. They're putting in this money, and basically these governments don't have a capability of paying it back. They've come to Prince Edward Island, invested tremendous amounts there in that government, and have close alliances and allegiances. And that's the subject of our book. And ultimately, I don't think America there's been a vacuum in their foreign policy, both in the global South and Africa, as well as in the South Pacific. And we need to get seriously about giving them an opportunity to say, hey, the aid and the investment from allies that won't exact the same kind of price, long-term price, that China is going to exact out of these nations is a far stronger and more strategic investment by the island nations than going with China. But so far, we have not come to the table with that kind of policy. But I think this is where India can play a critical role, because what India also doesn't want to have is China ultimately to be surrounding them and again, stopping the flow of commerce, et cetera. So again, we could say the Solomon Islands are a long way from India, but Sri Lanka is not. And as we know, Colombo has been overrun by the CCP and has had advisors there for decades. And ultimately, the CCP proxies within that nation are indeed directing public policy in that country.
Yeah, okay. Now, since I have a question in terms of considering that you are a regular at Washington, D.C. in the power corridors, how worried are they in terms of Trump coming back? What sort of a pushback is Trump likely to get? I mean, if he becomes president, of course, I guess Harris is more of the same continuity. But Trump is a disruptive figure. So what exactly are the power corridors saying?
I think the power corridors are clearly ready to work with either White House, and I think that they have been planning for this for a year, both sides, in terms of how they're going to work with either administration, and I think. Again, what will they prioritize? Trump will, prioritize a protectionist environment, manufacturing-wise. National security will be huge. Tariffs and against China and other, including allied nations, including Canada, which is on the surface insane. Given that 84% of our trade is with the United States, and we provide close to 35% of its natural gas, oil and gas energy. So getting into a fight with Canada is not a good idea. But as far as the inside the corridors of Washington, they're prepared to work with any administration and to continue on the great work that they've been doing. I had a conversation with some people that are involved with human rights. When I was in Sarajevo at the World Uyghur Congress. And they're cautiously optimistic if Trump comes in terms of being able to continue on in highlighting the human rights record of China and ensuring that human rights are respected globally. So I think that everyone's optimistic no matter who comes in, and then we'll see how it all plays out. It depends on who Trump surrounds himself with and who's going to go into that administration. And that is, I think, what worries some, is that the strength is not in those that are conscientiously objective in terms of decision making, but would rather be sycophants to Donald Trump. And that's a concern to everybody.
Now, okay, my last question is about the social divide, the kind of polarization that we see in the US. And, as you know about it, this kind of woke philosophy, woke stuff that has gone into this. And there is this transgender issue. All these things, there's the social divide, the so-called progressives and all. How big an issue are these issues? How big an issue is this divide, or rather, the direction that Biden administration seemed to have taken because of push from these so-called progressives?
Yeah, so Joyeeta, I think, that issue, well, that is the issue. I mean, those are the issues in terms of this divide in America in part. What you've seen actually is Kamala, without directly undermining her, her involvement with the Biden administration, has tactfully moved to a middle position. They've dropped the transgender issue. You have not heard it at all in the campaign, They've talked about women's reproductive rights as a centerpiece and a linchpin of the policy in the administration. And I think there was a recognition by Kamala Harris that if she's going to govern America, she had to move, as a Democrat, she had to move to the middle and had to change what I consider a very dangerous direction for America and for the West. And I think this has led, quite frankly, to this huge chasm between, if we want to call it right wing, left wing, but certainly the Democrats as conservatives in America. So, the reality is, as you know, that 70% of the electorate finds itself in the middle, either middle right, center, or center left. And that being the case, the other 15%, they're the ones that get all the traffic on social media. That's how you gain funding for your campaigns. But that's where no one should govern from. And I think that Kamala recognizes that and is moving that way. In Donald Trump's case, I think he's going to consider that he's being given a mandate if he wins, and therefore he will continue with his policies that he suggested he was going to enact. His conservative agenda. And I think that could be quite dangerous and also continue the divide in America. But no matter who becomes president, when victory is finally declared for the other, their opponent, that person needs to, stand up and congratulate the winner, and democracy must move on, and we must move on with the project, which is to get the business done of the government.
Absolutely, Dina. That's an absolutely brilliant thought to end the discussion with. Thank you so much for coming for this show. I hope you come to India soon. And thank you, viewers. Thank you for watching. Until the next time.